Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Hello friends, in this session we are going to look at the art of persuasion. Before this you have already completed motivation and especially self motivation, and after self motivation motivating others becomes a very important component that we must learn. So in that context when we are talking about the art of persuasion, these are the areas which we will cover in two sessions, art of persuasion part 1 and art of persuasion part 2. We will be looking at some of the persuasion experiments that you did. Then we will look at the definition, the relationship between communication and persuasion, the role of attitude, persuasive communication and its impact, and the role of the person who says it, the concept of fear appeal, language appeal, and a kind of a summary after that. So if you are looking at the entire thing, what comes out very significantly is that you must refer back to the experiment that I had given in the last week, which is in fact an experiment which is related to today's assignment, or an experiment or an assignment which is related to today's talk, and I will be sharing the findings on the net, so you can look at the findings over there, but the expected results are broadly what I will be discussing right now with you. The detailed results will be available in the discussion forum where it will be posted, and we can have further discussion on that. So now this is the text which was given to you. Faces are windows to human nature, BBC Science, and you find that what is done through this particular write-up that has been provided to you is to create a set of expectations about what faces communicate. Now the fun part of it, or the interesting part of it, is that where information is less and where information is credible, there is a greater chance of being persuaded by it. Here we need to note the difference between persuasion and manipulation, and also need to note the fact that differentiating between the two is fairly difficult and complicated. So we will go into that a little later, but you find that this study is an actual study. If you Google, you would find it, and this study to a certain extent influences the way that you respond to the questions. And as you realize, the questions were divided into two components. One group of people were given one set of questions, another group of people were given another set of questions, or rather this is what you saw, and you saw a specific image over here and you saw a specific image over here, one group. The images were reversed for the other group, and we took the responses to a basic personality test, a 5-point and 5-dimensional personality test, so known as the Big 5 personality test. And based on that, this particular survey was designed, and your responses significantly vary depending on the kind of stimuli or information which has been provided. So what happens is, number one, that two kinds of manipulations take place over here. The first one is that we have manipulated a certain set of information, and faces in general either look positive or negative, and based on that, where they match the patterns, you would get a strong trend which we will discuss in the forum, and depending on a mismatch, in spite of the mismatch, to a certain extent the text manages to manipulate us, and we get a slightly more confused, diluted set of responses. The reason for sharing this is twofold. One is that here you have a set of information, and wherever this information matches a face, you get a set of responses. Where this set of responses does not match a face, you still, because of this triggering, because you know that in spite of what has been said, this has actually been triggered and these have been linked together, and you believe this, you will get another set of responses. Now, the point is that once we do that, we realize that we are kind of manipulated, because the entire thing is a fiction. None of these, the information which is provided is true, and it is basically the perception which is being explored. The second point is that there are two different kind of stimuli. The first one is the text over here, the second is the relation between the two, and they interfere with one another or they complement with one another. In some case, when the face matches the profile as predicted here, you would have one set of responses. Where it does not match the profile, you would have another set of responses, and this becomes very, very interesting to explore, as we have done in the discussion forum. But let us come down to business. Life and history tells us that faces are very, very unpredictable, in spite of what research has told us a little earlier, which might be true for the majority of the cases. We find that if you are looking at the face of Jeremy Meeks, he kind of was created a social media kind of a viral communication, and his face went viral, this image went viral, because although this is the face of a arsonist and a criminal who is very strongly destructive, it was considered as a very attractive looking face, exciting face and all that. The same happens with the case of Marzen, who also is considered to be a child abductor and a person with a criminal history, and the face is deceptive. On the other hand, the third one is a case of a classic case of a criminal, and where what information we expect from the face and what it depicts matches. Very often you see that if you are looking at stereotyping, this is what is known as stereotyping. These are non-stereotypical, because you expect something and something else happens. Now, you see that having said that, having discussed, having tested it out, we are probably right now ready to talk about persuasion in a significant way. Now, what I would like to share with you, friends, is that probably our very act of interaction with anybody is an act of persuasion. It might not seem so, but let me share with you the first point. The point is that if I wish to become a friend with somebody, this very act of trying to be friendly with somebody, smiling, getting along, agreeing to that person, is a way of trying to endear myself to that person. It is a kind of a persuasion, because the other person needs to be persuaded to build up an interaction with you. Every day on the internet, you get a wide range of emails, okay, and these emails range from emails which promise you millions of dollars, which is trying to manipulate you, to let us say emails which are asking you to buy certain products, which are definitely persuasion in the context of advertising, which is very, very significant, as we will discuss a little later, to people trying to get in touch with you, say that let us say in our field they are doing research in similar areas and are interested to work with you, which is again where they are giving a set of their areas of interest, their areas of research, the deep sense of interest they have for the subject and all that, so that these students or researchers can work with you. So, every day, even if you look at as simple a case as email communication on a daily basis, the persuasive process is on. So, it is a pervasive thing in that sense, because we are trying to persuade one another. I am trying to persuade my child to read My child is trying to persuade me not to read. Somebody is persuading me to watch a movie. Somebody is persuading me to read a novel because he feels that it's a very exciting novel. We are perpetually trying to do that throughout our lives. But then you find that it's a question of degree, it's a question of authenticity, which differentiate between what we can consider as serious persuasion from these day-to-day routine acts of persuasion, and which can differentiate it from what can be called manipulation. Now, manipulation is a very interesting area, as we will discuss a little later, but let us go over the points that we have made about persuasion. The first and the most persuasive person in a family is the child, because the child is somebody who very often is not familiar with the rules and is always interested in new things, new toys, new chocolates, ice creams and things like that, perpetually trying to persuade you to maybe buy those things. Whether they are good for the child or not is a different thing altogether, but this persuasion process is very much on. And the other interesting thing about persuasion is that everybody feels that he or she is intelligent enough not to be persuaded, intelligent enough to see through the treachery of perception, if you might use the term, okay, and get to know the truth. This in itself is misleading. But if you are talking about somebody giving you advice or you giving advice to somebody, what is it? Isn't it persuasion in some sense? What about the decisions you take? How is it that you take them? Is it not that much of the time you are checking the net, you are looking at the technical specs, you are looking at that, you are looking at other people's comments? Are you not getting persuaded by what you see all around you? The various kinds of information that are available to you also manage to persuade you. So, the point is that what is it that I have been trying to do in the last let us say 10 minutes or so. So, what I am trying to do is to persuade you that you can be persuaded. If you have a belief that you are strong, you are determined, you are objective and cannot be persuaded, what I am doing right now is try to convince you that guys, you can be persuaded. Try to see the fact that you can be persuaded. If you agree with me, then I have succeeded. This is the first act of persuasion that I do in this class, in this session. But persuasion is probably as old as time, because if you are looking at various old traditions, you have examples of persuasion as well. The Bhagavad Gita is one burning example in our tradition. What is it that we are talking about? Let us say that a person stands in front of his enemies, who also happen to be his brothers, his cousins, his nephews, his grandparents, grandfather, and so on and so forth. And he is trying to tell, that is Arjuna, is trying to tell Lord Krishna that why should I kill these people? What will I gain? Even if I gain materially, is it of any use? Because after all I am killing my near and dear ones. And yet at the end of the 18th chapter, Arjuna is ready to fight. What has happened within those 18 chapters? What has happened within those, let us say, an hour or two in the battlefield? Krishna has been able to persuade Arjuna to fight through different strategies, different ways of doing it. That does not necessarily mean that what he has done is necessarily untruth. What he has done is necessarily a manipulation. What Lord Krishna has done is essentially cheating Arjuna. Well, not that. It is a kind of it is a matter of perspective, how you take things, but you would be able to do that in a different way if you, I mean, it is your objective or your subjective attitude, but the fundamental issue involved over here is that persuasion takes place because Arjuna in some way or the other is convinced that whatever Lord Krishna is telling is the truth. The famous lines of Julius Caesar written by Shakespeare, where Antonio is giving a speech trying to tell that although Brutus is just in what he has done, over a period of a few minutes in the speech, he manages to convince the people that everything that Brutus has done is actually wrong. So, a classic case of persuasion. Politicians today try to persuade us, because when there are two politicians, obviously somebody has to win, and in order to do that, the people have to agree with his point of view or her point of view, and there again persuasion takes place. So, persuasion is not something new, and before we proceed any further, we need to understand that persuasion is not something which is bad or wrong. Persuasion is something which is a part of our life, as I have already convinced you, hopefully. But persuasion is also something which needs to be differentiated from manipulation. Manipulation takes place in sales, manipulation takes place in our lives, manipulation takes place in friendship, relationships. Manipulation is where somebody is doing something without actually intending honestly to mean it. Okay. Doing something without actually meaning what you say, in a certain sense, is manipulation. Doing something which in a way hurts the other people is in some sense a manipulation. Doing things where what you are saying is not actually what is the fact, and you know it, is again manipulation. So, what basically happens is that in some sense it is a subset of persuasion, as is brainwashing, Stockholm syndrome, which we will talk about, but it usually works temporarily, because it is not the state of affairs actually. If you are looking at the example of Gita, for Arjuna and for many practicing Hindus, the words over there seem to be true throughout their lives, and so hence they practice it. So, in that sense we would not call it manipulation, but for anybody who believes that no, it is something which just influenced me temporarily and I do not agree with it, I do not believe in that, it would be kind of seen as a kind of a manipulation. So, there is a subjective dimension to it, but more important than that, what is relevant is to find out what exactly is happening when somebody is manipulating somebody else. One is temporary. If it is something which can be verified, and if it is the untruth, then it is manipulation. It is focused, it is centered around the person who is manipulating, because vested interest is involved. Advertising very often falsehood, so that vested interest is enhanced. Okay. That happens with many companies which are selling similar kinds of products and trying to claim that one product is better than the other. Artificial conditions, the conditions through which you are undertaking these are artificial, that is, they are short lived, again linked to the second point and the first point, the first point, which is deception. Deception is something which can be found out, and in that sense it is something which is not the real state of affairs. So, artificial conditions. Intent of the person manipulating, persuading very often decides whether it is manipulation or persuasion, because if your intentions are good, you are actually innocent, whatever you are trying to convince is actually a falsehood, that is a different issue altogether. But otherwise, if you know what you are doing is wrong, you know what you are doing is cheating, and you are doing it, it is manipulation. Generally, the condition is that the person who is being manipulated realizes or has an open mind, is open to be manipulated, and time is key. You want to do it quickly, you want to do it with as much reinforcement as possible, so that at the end of the day this process takes place and you are able to get what you want. Brainwashing is a technique where you see that it can have elements of persuasion, it can also have elements of coercion, forcing somebody, combined together, and repetition is something which is distinctively there, and hence we would put it under the category of manipulation. On the other hand, Stockholm syndrome is something very interesting which changes perception, but it is not really manipulation. You are persuaded not by the forces which are trying to persuade you in any way, and comes from the fact that in many cases where there is a hostage situation, the hostage at some point of time he becomes empathetic towards the person who is holding her hostage. Now, this is a very strange symptom, and you find that they become emotionally dependent on the people, the terrorists who are holding them, and this is called the Stockholm syndrome, because this is not what you anticipate after coming out of, let us say, captivity after 10 days or 10 years, 10 months, does not really matter. Very often or even during captivity, even acts of let us say unkindness are often interpreted in positive ways, and somebody gets kind of obsessively attached to a person. These are extreme situations where the mind works in different ways. There are a lot of theories related to that, but this again gets linked to persuasion in various interesting ways, and we need to be aware of the fact that it is neither persuasion nor manipulation, because it is not intentional, but it happens. And you see that the interesting thing is that something like the Stockholm syndrome can be used by people who are using brainwashing as a condition where this manipulation can actually take place. Now, we will look at 6 key factors which, as we proceed with this presentation, will become significant, and the first one is reciprocation. That is absolutely necessary in the act of persuasion, because when I am trying to persuade somebody, that person must agree with me. If that does not happen, then persuasion does not take place. Social proof is about how authentic your conditions seem, how authentic your persuasive strategy seems, how authentic whatever you are trying to tell the other person seems within a socio-cultural context. Commitment and consistency. Commitment in the sense that you are persuading with a certain degree of consistency, reliability, you are not changing your versions, and you seem to be dedicated to what you are saying, what you are trying to profess. Now, these become very important when you are making trying to persuade somebody. Liking is very important, because unless you like an idea, like a thought, like a product, at least temporarily, you are not going to get persuaded to, let us say, accept it or buy it. Okay. So, even if an illusion of liking is created, at least for a short period of time, as we discussed in the context of manipulation, that liking, element of liking has to be there. Very often authority figure plays a very important role. We will discuss that a little later, because who is endorsing, who is saying something, becomes very important. In even our tradition, when we talk about proofs of authenticity, the concept of something being true or false in Indian tradition, pramana, we talk about the fact that in certain cases the person who is making the declaration decides whether something will be considered as a valid argument or a not so valid argument. So, and scarcity, something is scarce, something is valuable, then it is easy to get persuaded about it. Now, the contemporary colors of persuasion are very important to realize, and this session also we will be doing a few experiments using social media. Please look at our discussion forum, the links provided, and please become a part of it, because with your help only we are going to do some very exciting research to find out certain aspects about manipulation, persuasion, and the way our views change, the different kinds of biases that are created, and it can only happen if you participate willingly in the different activities other than the regular assignment that we are going to give you. And if you do that in large numbers, only then we will be able to analyze the results and get back to you next week with the result findings, which would be very exciting, because we will be working in collaboration trying to solve certain questions that we raise in this particular course itself. So, in that context, here it is sheer number, size, media, social network. So, this is where persuasion is taking place on a massive scale, and that is where advertising comes in. If you remember, we talked about visual communication, visual aesthetics, we talked about advertising, the role that visuals play, how persuasive visuals are, and here when we are talking about social media, we find that to be happening. They travel very fast. In the contemporary context, they travel at the speed of light, because information travels at the speed of light. Manipulating people, persuading people, creating a riot, let us say in England in one particular place, or passing on the information using, let us say, Twitter data, or on a Facebook, creating a pandemonium, or doing something constructive. All these things are happening at the speed of light, and it is happening on social media. So, the first two things are very, very significant, because these are the two issues we will be addressing during our experiments that we will be doing together in this sessions this week. Institutionalized, because in business and in research, this is something which is an in thing, a lot of research is going on. Okay. And as of now, we are doing a little bit of research ourselves, and this is very important, and it has become more subtle and devious, because manipulation today has complex channels, multiple channels, and hence you find that it is significant to realize that it is very subtle. And when we discuss some of the experiments, when I share with you some of our papers which deal with persuasion and manipulation, you will realize how subtle it is, how devious, how indistinctive, very carefully, very subtly it is being done. And obviously in the process it has become more complex, involving ethnicity, culture, media, globalization, and so on and so forth. Now, having said all that, let us try to have a working definition of what is persuasion. Persuasion is about eliciting a desired response, changing somebody's attitude, making others accept somebody, influence other people's mental states. And here is a definition that we have, which we can use in order to understand what persuasion is. So, symbolic, because it takes place through language, it takes place through images. Convincing, do not need to explain that. Change, because persuasion means that an attitude has been modified. Initially you are not interested to buy something, now you are interested to buy it, your attitude has been modified. Earlier you are not interested to listen to music, now you are interested to listen to music, your attitude has been modified. And this has been done symbolically through some messages which have been communicated through maybe words, images, non-verbal communication, advertising, music, and so on and so forth, in an apparent, I would say, atmosphere of free choice. Because why free choice? Because although persuasion is taking place, you obviously have the choice of getting out of it. You have the choice of not getting persuaded. Whether you get persuaded or not is your choice, but coercion is where you are forced to choose something. Now, we have discussed that persuasion is as old as civilization, and if you are looking at the history of Western traditions, again, sophists, and we used to teach people how to practice oratory, because for the Romans, where you see that the citizens of the state used to take decisions, persuading one another within that free climate was very, very important. And Plato was kind of opposed to it, because in search of truth he had to ignore what could be manipulated, and persuasion is something where you can manipulate somebody's way of thinking. Then Aristotle kind of classified it, persuasion, into three categories, talked about ethos, logos, and pathos. And even today, when we are talking about the contemporary context, these concepts hold very, very true. What do we mean by ethos? Ethos is credibility, trust, and gets very often linked to brand name, logo, the person who is speaking, and all kinds of things. Logos is logic, consistency, and again that is something which you find in various contexts. On the other hand, pathos is where there is an appeal to emotions and to imagination, and in advertising this plays a very, very significant role. So, if you look at this situation, we find that probably whatever we look at and whatever is used today in the context of advertising for persuasion are all there, okay, in this particular formula that we have: credibility, trust, where a person maybe or a brand has built that up and you are using that; logic, saying that this is good, okay, so you are persuaded to buy; and emotions are very, very distinctively to be found. Let us now look at the difference between persuasion and coercion. Now, I have already elaborated on persuasion, but coercion is where force is applied. Okay. Examples are threatening messages, employees directives, interrogation, communication in dangerously abusive relationships, and there are borderline cases like art, movies, music, entertainment, TV shows, advertisements, persuasive heart rendering photographs, where it is very difficult to differentiate whether you are being persuaded or in certain ways directly or indirectly forced into a situation. Now, the case study that I have presented over here is an example, and you can open the slide and check it out and do it yourself and give your opinion about it on the discussion forum where we have a space for it. Now, what we look at next are the persuasive effects of communication, and these are very significant in the context of advertising. For instance, shaping is where what happens is that something is repeated again and again with the hope that people will be forced to believe it. For example, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette. Now, the fact that cigarette is harmful is obviously something which is in the background, but in spite of that, an indirect persuasion is being made that these cigarettes are less harmful than other cigarettes. Reinforcing is repetition, doing it in different ways, okay, and in different kinds of varieties of ways, and it can be used in different contexts as indicated in changing. Now, here is an example of the way that attitudes can change. For instance, if you are looking at even 50 years back, Negro was not a bad word, but today if you call somebody Negro or a nigger, it is considered a bad word, it is bad mouthing something. And that is because you see that over a period of time, for socio-cultural reasons and in different kinds of contexts, this word gradually became a taboo word, a word which is forbidden, which is not to be used in civilized society. But before that, if you are looking at novels before that, you find that Negro or nigger are pretty widespread words and they are accepted. For instance, today in the context of gender, whenever we address somebody, we use she instead of he when the person is unknown. So, I say that if I meet someone, she should be nice to me. Earlier we used to say he should be nice to me. So, we have been persuaded to change the way we look at things, and this has a complex relationship with, okay, let us say, change that has taken place and the way this society looks at this change. And attitudes as anchors to persuasion is something with which we will start off with different components of persuasion, and we will do that in the next set of sessions, where we will talk about attitude, we will talk about people, we will talk about message, and that is the way we will detail out the different aspects of persuasion. So, for today here we stop. Thank you very much.